It all began so gently, so quietly, that at first it felt like nothing at all. A simple friendship, the kind built on shared books, inside jokes, and conversations that stretched into the late afternoon. There was no grand moment of realization, no fireworks, no music swelling in the background, just two people walking through life side by side, unaware of how closely their paths were weaving together. That's how it happens sometimes. The heart doesn't announce its plans. It just leans in softly, steadily, until one day you realize you've let someone in deeper than you ever meant to. At first, everything felt easy. The comfort of knowing someone understood your silences as well as your words. The way a glance could speak louder than sentences. The security of knowing that, even on your quietest days, someone would still choose to sit beside you. We laughed about the most ridiculous things. We teased each other endlessly, never too harsh, always playful. Those moments seemed so light then, like leaves floating on the surface of water. But now I know that was the beginning of something real. Looking back, I think I mistook the depth of it for simplicity. I didn't realize how deeply someone could become part of your everyday world without ever asking for it. The way we looked for each other in crowded rooms. The way I found myself saving stories to tell later, knowing they would be understood better in that space between us. Slowly, almost invisibly, friendship started to shift, not in any dramatic way. There were no declarations, no changes in tone. Just more. A stronger pull, a feeling that this connection was not just comforting, but necessary. There were moments that gave it away, small, fleeting ones that stayed with me. The time we sat quietly after a long day, and for the first time the silence wasn't filled. It was simply shared, the warmth of a shoulder brushing against mine during a walk that felt longer because neither of us wanted it to end. A hand reaching out, not for attention, not for drama, just to say, I'm here. That kind of closeness doesn't come often. And when it does, you don't always realize it's love, until it's already taken root. What surprised me most was the fear. Not fear of the connection, but fear of naming it. Because once you give something a name, it becomes real. And real things can be broken. So we kept dancing around it, kept pretending we didn't notice what was happening. There was a safety in pretending, a comfort in the familiar rhythm of friendship. But deep down, something had already changed. I knew it when a single word from them could brighten or darken my entire day, when I started seeing pieces of them in everything around me, when their absence felt heavier than I wanted to admit. And still I said nothing. Because what if speaking it aloud meant losing it altogether? That's the strange paradox of love when it begins in friendship. It grows quietly, respectfully, without rushing. But it also carries the risk of ruining everything. And so we held on to what we had, both of us too careful, too cautious. We stayed in that in-between space where affection hides behind laughter and longing is tucked behind casual words. But make no mistake, what lived in those moments was real. It was love, just waiting for the courage to be spoken. Maybe that's why those days still linger with me, because nothing ever needed to be said aloud for me to know how deeply it mattered. And while some might say that love unspoken is love unfinished, I think there's a quiet kind of beauty in it, in recognizing that something sacred was born in the spaces between our words, something that changed me, not in a sudden, dramatic way, but slowly, like sunlight warming the earth. Sometimes the most profound feelings are the ones we never quite say. And sometimes the love that begins in friendship is the kind that stays with us forever, not because it lasted, but because it taught us how deep the heart can go, even without a map. And that's how a soft friendship turned into something deeper. There's something about first love that stays with you, no matter how much time passes. It's not about how long it lasted or how perfect it was, because in truth it rarely is perfect. First love is messy. It's filled with uncertainty, mistakes, and emotions that feel too big for the space they're given. But somehow, that's exactly what makes it unforgettable. It's the rawness of it. The newness, the way it catches you off guard and refuses to let go. When it came, I didn't know how to handle it. I had read about love, heard stories, seen it in movies, but living it, that was something else entirely. It didn't come with instructions. It didn't ask if I was ready. It simply showed up, unexpected, and changed everything. Suddenly, I cared more than I thought I could. A word, a glance, a shift in tone, it all mattered. And no matter how I tried to act unaffected, my heart gave me away every time. I remember overthinking the simplest things. What to say, how to say it, whether I should say anything at all. I'd catch myself smiling at a text, replaying conversations in my head, noticing details I never would have seen before, like the way someone's eyes crinkle when they laugh, or how their voice softens when they're tired. I became a collector of moments, storing them away like tiny treasures, afraid that if I didn't hold onto them tightly, they might disappear. But love, especially first love, doesn't always know how to stay calm. It rushes in with all its intensity and beauty, and sometimes that intensity is too much. We stumble, we say the wrong thing, we get scared, we pull back. We imagine 100 reasons why it can't work instead of believing in the one reason it could. That's what I did, tangled myself in doubt, convinced myself that maybe it was one-sided, or that I wasn't enough, or that if I spoke the truth, everything would fall apart. And yet, the feelings never really left. They lived in the pauses between our conversations, in the way my heart beat faster when I heard their name, in the silence after they walked away. There were moments when everything felt so right, walking side by side, laughing at nothing, just being, that I wondered how I could ever doubt it. And there were moments when it all felt impossibly fragile, like one wrong word could shatter everything we'd built. That's the thing no one really tells you about first love. It teaches you as much through what doesn't work as through what does. It teaches you how deeply you can feel, even when you don't have the words to explain it. It teaches you that love isn't always smooth or easy, but it's real even when it's confusing. And more than anything, it teaches you what matters, what you're willing to fight for, what kind of person you are when you care that deeply. I made mistakes. I didn't always say what I should have. I let fear take the lead more times than I'd like to admit. I waited for the perfect moment to speak my heart, and of course that moment never came, because love isn't about waiting for perfection. It's about being brave in the middle of the mess, and I wasn't, not then. Maybe I just didn't know how. Maybe I wasn't ready. Or maybe I was just too afraid of losing what little I had by reaching for something more. Even now, I think about those days and how vivid they still are. Certain memories don't fade. The first time our hands brushed, the smile that made me forget what I was saying, the late night talks that felt like the world had paused just for us. There's a sweetness in those memories, even if they ended with silence. Because even silence has meaning when it follows something that once meant everything. Some people say first love isn't real love, that it's just infatuation, just practice for something better that comes later. But I disagree. First love is real, real in its own way. It may not be polished or patient or even sustainable, but it's powerful. It marks you. It becomes part of your story, not because it was flawless, but because it was yours. Yours to feel, to learn from, to remember. And that's what makes it unforgettable. It's funny how the smallest moments end up meaning the most. You don't realize it when they're happening. when you're just sitting there laughing about something silly, sharing a snack, or walking nowhere in particular. But those are the memories that stay with you, the ones that replay in your mind when everything else gets blurry. And I've found that it's those little shared pieces of time, the quiet, ordinary minutes, that make a connection feel unforgettable. There was one afternoon I still think about sometimes. It wasn't anything special, not in the way people usually talk about special moments. We were just sitting on a bench, the sun warm on our faces, and something small had made us laugh. One of those laughs that catches you off guard and won't stop coming. We weren't trying to impress each other, weren't talking about anything important. But there was something about the way we laughed in sync, the ease between us that felt whole. It was the kind of laughter that didn't need permission or explanation. It just lived in that space, freely, honestly. That's what I mean by small moments. They don't announce themselves with fanfare. They're tucked into the corners of everyday life. The way someone holds the door for you without thinking. The glance they give you when something inside joke is mentioned. The quiet good morning that feels like it belongs to just you two. And in those tiny gestures something deeper is said. Something that doesn't need words to be understood. We often chase after big, dramatic memories. We think love has to be about grand declarations and fireworks, but sometimes love whispers instead of shouting. Sometimes it shows up in the way someone saves you the last piece of chocolate, or how they look over at you during a funny scene in a movie, just to make sure you're laughing too. It's in the pauses between conversations where you feel safe in the silence, where nothing needs to be said and yet everything is felt. There was a time when I didn't really understand that. I used to look for signs, huge, obvious signs, that something was real. I thought if it didn't come with certainty or big moments, it wasn't strong enough. But now I know different. Now I know that the most meaningful connections grow in between the ordinary. They grow in the shared umbrella on a rainy day, the song you both love but never planned to hear together, the quiet walk home where nothing happened, except everything. What stays with me the most is how natural it all felt. How the rhythm of our days began to align, not because we planned it, but because we genuinely enjoyed each other's company. There's something powerful about finding someone who makes the world feel lighter, even if it's just for a few minutes at a time. Someone whose presence makes everything feel more alive, more possible. We laughed over nothing, but it meant everything, because in that laughter was trust, comfort, connection, and maybe that's why it hurt so much when things began to change. Because when you lose something big, you expect the ache. But when it's those little moments that disappear, the jokes that no longer land, the coffee that's no longer shared, the way you no longer meet each other's eyes at the same time, that's when you really feel the emptiness. You miss the laugh before the joke, the anticipation that they'll understand you without needing the full story. You miss being known in the simplest ways. Still, I hold on to those memories, not to dwell on them, but because they remind me of something true. That love, real love, isn't always in the declarations. It's in the way you feel seen during the most unremarkable parts of your day. It's in the joy of doing nothing together and still feeling like it was the best part of your week. It's in the shared laughter, even if that laugh came from a bad pun or a dumb story or something completely random. That kind of laughter heals you, it grounds you, it builds something that even time has trouble fading. So now, when I think about what matters most, I don't think about grand endings or perfect beginnings. I think about a shared glance across a crowded room. I think about the sound of laughter floating through the air like music no one else can hear. And I think that's what love really is, a series of small moments strung together like stars, lighting up a part of your life you never want to forget. There were so many times I wanted to say something, but the words just wouldn't come. It wasn't because I didn't feel them. If anything, I felt them too much. They lived in my chest like a quiet ache, pressing at the edges of every conversation. But every time I got close, fear stepped in. Not the loud, dramatic kind of fear, the quieter, more dangerous kind, the one that whispers, "What if this ruins everything?" It's strange how something as honest as a feeling can become so hard to admit. You'd think it would be simple, just tell someone what they mean to you, but the closer someone is, the more terrifying it becomes, because when you care that much, the risk isn't just rejection. It's losing something that already feels precious. And so you start holding back, telling yourself that the timing isn't right, or that maybe the feeling will fade if you ignore it long enough, but it doesn't. It just sits there, silently stretching the space between you. I used to convince myself that staying silent was the safest choice, that I could protect what we had by not changing it. But the truth is, silence can change everything too. It creates a distance you don't notice at first. Just a missed opportunity here, a moment passed by there. But slowly that space grows. Conversations feel lighter, but not in a good way. Smiles still happen, but they don't reach the eyes. And even though nothing has been said, everything feels different. There were times I'd look over and want to say, "I miss how close we were." But even that felt too vulnerable, so I smiled instead. I kept the laughter going. I nodded in all the right places, and underneath it all, I was hoping they'd somehow just know, without me having to say it. But people can't read minds, and waiting for someone to figure out how you feel is like asking the rain to fall just because you're thirsty. It doesn't work that way. The more I hesitated, the harder it became. And what hurt the most was watching the connection I loved start to fade. Not because we didn't care, but because neither of us could break through the fear. I think both of us were waiting for a sign, for certainty, for some magical moment where everything would make sense and the words would come easily. But life doesn't always give you those moments. Sometimes it gives you just a quiet window, a chance to speak, and if you let it pass, it closes. I still remember one of those chances. It was late. We were walking, side by side, not saying much. The streetlights were low, and there was this gentle kind of silence between us, the kind that almost invites truth. I looked over, opened my mouth, and nothing. The words caught in my throat, and instead of speaking, I said something completely unrelated. I watched that window close right in front of me, and I've thought about that moment more times than I can count. The hardest part about holding back isn't just what you lose, it's what you never get to know. I'll never know what might have happened if I'd spoken up sooner. If I'd said, "I care, you matter more to me than I can explain," maybe it would have changed everything. Or maybe it wouldn't, but at least I'd know. Instead, all I'm left with are guesses and what-ifs. Fear is a quiet destroyer. It doesn't storm in and tear things apart. It simply waits. It convinces you that hiding your heart is safer than offering it. That staying quiet will protect what's important. But it doesn't. It creates cracks where connection used to live. It builds walls that even the strongest feelings can't always climb. And yet, I still believe those feelings were real. They didn't vanish just because they were never spoken. They lived in every look, every pause, every almost confession, and even though fear won that time, it taught me something too. It taught me that love doesn't just need to be felt. It needs to be shared. It needs courage, vulnerability, the willingness to risk awkward silences or unanswered words. Because distance isn't always about miles. Sometimes it's just the space between what we feel and what we say. If I could go back, I wouldn't wait. I wouldn't let fear decide for me, because what I know now is this: saying nothing doesn't keep someone close. It only guarantees they'll never really know how deeply they were loved. There's something haunting about a goodbye that was never meant to be final, the kind that comes quietly without ceremony and somehow still manages to leave a silence that stretches far beyond that moment. It's strange how a single word goodbye can carry so much weight. It looks so small when you write it down. It feels so ordinary when you say it out loud. But when it's said between two people who once shared everything, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes a sentence filled with everything that was never spoken, never explained, never resolved. I remember the way the air felt just before it happened, that stillness, that sense that something was shifting. We weren't angry. There was no shouting, no blame, just a quiet recognition that something had changed. Maybe it had been changing for a while. Maybe we were too careful with each other to admit it. But that day, it was impossible to ignore. And as we stood there, trying to find the right words, it became clear there weren't any. There was only that one goodbye, and everything it refused to say. What hurt the most wasn't what was said, but what wasn't. There were so many things I wanted to ask, so many things I wanted to explain, but instead we both held back, out of pride, out of fear, I don't even know. All I know is that the silence between us was filled with 1,000 emotions we didn't have the courage to voice. There was disappointment, regret, love still flickering quietly despite the distance, and maybe even hope, just a trace of it, that something might still change. But sometimes people part not because they want to, but because they don't know how to stay. We walked away from each other carrying so much we never unpacked. Memories, misunderstandings, moments that should have been talked through, but were instead buried beneath polite smiles. And that goodbye, so soft, so brief, became the closing chapter of something I hadn't been ready to end. For days afterward I replayed it, not just the words but the pauses between them, the way our eyes didn't quite meet, the way we hesitated before walking away. It was in that hesitation that everything lived, the confusion, the longing, the quiet ache of unfinished feelings. 1,000 emotions, none of them spoken, all of them real, and maybe that's what makes goodbye so powerful. It's not just the end of a conversation. It's the end of a shared language. All the inside jokes, the shared glances, the little routines built over time, they don't get a goodbye. They just stop happening, and you're left trying to carry those moments alone, wondering if they remember them too, if they feel the same weight pressing on their chest at night. It's strange how life keeps moving even after something so important slips away. People around you laugh, traffic keeps buzzing, the sun still rises, but inside there's a stillness, a sense that something is missing even if you can't explain it out loud. You go through your day and then something, a song, a street, a phrase, pulls you right back to that moment. That goodbye, and all the things you didn't say come rushing back like a tide. I've learned since then that goodbyes don't always bring closure. Sometimes they're just quiet pauses where connection used to be. Sometimes they leave questions you'll never get answers to. And that's the part you have to learn to live with, not because you want to, but because there's no other choice. And yet, even in that ache, there's something beautiful. Because you don't grieve what never mattered. That single goodbye, as painful as it was, is proof that what we had was real, that it meant something, that, for a time, there was a bond so deep it hurt to let go of. And though we didn't say everything we could have, the emotions were there. They lived in our silence, in the way we turned away just a second too late, in the way our voices cracked slightly, pretending to be steady. So when I look back now, I don't just see the ending. I see everything that led up to it, the laughter, the warmth, the shared moments that shaped me in ways I'm still discovering. And while I wish I had said more, had given voice to the feelings behind that final word, I know they were felt. Deeply, even if unspoken, because sometimes a single goodbye carries all the love, all the pain, and all the memories that words could never hold. Some stories don't stay forever, but that doesn't mean they don't leave something behind. Even when it ends, even when the calls stop, the messages fade, and the days begin to look different, what you shared doesn't disappear. It becomes part of you, like a photograph folded into the pages of your life. A quiet reminder that you once felt something real and that feeling changed you. There was a time I thought moving on meant forgetting, that the only way to let go of a story was to erase it, to push it into the background and never let it surface again. But that's not how it works. The truth is, some memories don't ask for permission. They show up when you least expect them, in the corner of a song, in the taste of a certain drink, in the way someone laughs on the street. And when they do, you realize that forgetting was never the point. You're not meant to forget, you're meant to carry it, with softness, not bitterness, with gratitude, not regret. Even the stories that end too soon give us something. They teach us how to open up, how to trust, how to see someone not just for who they are, but for who they are when they're with us. They teach us to notice the small things, the comfort of a hand nearby, the comfort of being understood without having to explain. And when it's over, what remains isn't just the sadness, it's also the growth, the strength, the reminder that you had the courage to care that deeply. There are still moments that come back to me. Not the dramatic ones, but the quiet ones. The way the sun lit the side of someone's face during a conversation. The sound of shared laughter in a crowded place. The peaceful rhythm of walking in step with someone you felt completely yourself around. Those details don't fade. They settle into you, becoming part of how you see the world, part of how you love again. And maybe that's what memory really is, not something you look back on, but something you carry forward. The story might be over, but the effect of it isn't. It lingers in your kindness, in your empathy, in the way you hold space for others because you remember what it felt like to be held that way. It's woven into the way you listen, the way you pause before responding, the way you choose your words carefully now, not out of fear, but out of understanding. People sometimes ask, if it didn't last, was it still love? And I think the answer is yes. Absolutely. Because love doesn't only count if it stays. It counts if it touched you, if it made you better, if it brought out the kind of vulnerability you'd never shown before. Love, even when it ends, is still love. And that chapter, however short, doesn't lose its meaning just because the book moved on. I don't look back with bitterness. There was too much beauty in that story to hold it with anything but tenderness. Yes, it ended. Yes, it hurt, but it also mattered. It was real. And now, even in its absence, it shapes how I see connection, how I show up for the people in my life, how I recognize love not just in grand gestures, but in consistency, in patience, in the gentle way someone looks at you when they think you're not watching. You see, endings don't erase meaning, they just shift it. The relationship may not be part of my present, but the person I became through that time, that version of me who learned to open up, who discovered what it feels like to truly care, is still here, still growing, still becoming, and that's what I carry with me, not the pain, not the absence, but the transformation, the quiet understanding that some stories, even short ones, change the entire way we move through life. And when someone asks, do you still think about it? I don't flinch. I don't pretend to forget. I simply smile because yes, I do think about it, not constantly, not sadly, but with respect, with a kind of peaceful fondness. Because even if the story ends, the memory becomes a part of who we are. Some feelings were never spoken, but they shaped me all the same. Even if the story ended, its quiet moments and laughter still live in me. So I'll carry this good, by not with sorrow, but with gratitude for everything it gave,